Hello friends, welcome back to the Itsy Guitar YouTube channel. As you can see by the title, this video's topic is Relic'd guitars, which is probably the most controversial topic in the guitar world. Although I should make a caveat and say not, the real world of like seeing people face to face or being at gigs or whatever else doesn't really come up there. It's pretty much exclusively online and with forums or Facebook groups or whatnot. And it is super heated. People are very, very strongly for or against Relic guitars. And I'm just going to say right off the rip, from my perspective, I think the argument against Relic guitars is just flat out dumb. I don't think it makes sense. I think it's illogical. I can kind of understand where it comes from, but it boggles my mind, honestly, especially when people get really, really adamant about it. So we're going to get into some of the arguments, the most common arguments I see online against Relic guitars, and kind of talk through those a little bit. But I'm just going to say my stance right off the rip. I own several guitars, both Relic and non-Relic. I own, a few Gibson VOS finish guitars, which is their basically minimal aging that they offer for reissues. So they do offer gloss sometimes. It's very rare. I've never seen one in person before. Basically, VOS is the standard closest to gloss you can get for the most part. And then obviously they own all the way up to ultra heavy aged Murphy Lab. I've never owned a Murphy Lab. I played many though. I have many friends that have them. But I also own Relic Gibsons, and then Fender world, I own a couple Relic Fenders. I own a Journeyman, which is kind of their minimal Relic as well, similar to VOS, but with actual checking typically. And then I also own a pretty heavy Relic Fender Custom Shop. I own a Danocaster you see over here, which is, Relic. I own a Gretsch that's not Relic. I kind of got a little bit of everything, and I own a vintage guitar as well, which is obviously not Relic. So I've got some experience with all of it. And so I feel like I can speak for the pluses and minuses of each of those types of guitars. But ultimately, it all boils down to something very simple. I just think it's an aesthetic choice. I just think it's akin to, I like red. You like blue. There's nothing about you liking blue that stops me from liking red. Me liking red doesn't hurt you in any way, doesn't affect you liking blue in any way. And I really think that's what the Relic stuff boils down to. It's an aesthetic preference. People like the look of Relic guitars. That does not hurt the person that does not like the look of Relic guitars. The only person that can claim that they are harmed in some way by you liking a Relic guitar, in my opinion, is the person that wants more gloss guitars from Gibson, for example. And, they really leaned into the Murphy Lab, and so the gloss guitars basically disappeared. I mean, gloss guitars were already rare before that. So, you can't claim that they were super plentiful before Murphy Lab came about. But they probably have decreased somewhat thanks to Murphy Lab. That's the only person I can really think of that can claim some kind of harm from the trend towards Relic guitars. If you really want a completely factory fresh reissue, it's going to be a bit harder to find, but that's just the manufacturers following the market. The market has spoken, and they much prefer, in general, they being the guitar market, Relic guitars. And they like having the options of super Relic to lightly Relic, and that's why you have the varying degrees of Relic from Fender and Gibson. Now, there are also companies that have completely shunned the idea. For example, PRS. I'm not aware of any Relic PRS guitars out there, and that's their market. They're, their target customer. So be it. Again, there's plenty of options if you don't want a Relic guitar. There's plenty of options if you do. So I just don't understand it. I don't understand why people get so angry and so against Relic guitars. So now that I've kind of established my high-level opinions real quick, let's try and talk about the main arguments against Relic guitars. And the most common one I see online is the claim that a Relic guitar is it's akin to stolen valor, which is just, to me, absurd. It's such a crazy thing to say, to equate those two to each other. But if I take a step back a little bit, and, obviously I see the world through my lens. I'm 30 years old. That has effect on what I see. So if I take a step back, because, for the most part, the people that are levying that that accusation of, oh, stolen valor with a Relic guitar. They tend to be older than me for sure. You know, I think it goes back a little bit to the days which I have no memory of because it predates me, but having new jeans, raw jeans, right? And then eventually designer jeans started coming out, and you have, you know, jeans that have some wear to them. They're slightly faded in places, and, you know, they might have rips or whatever in them for aesthetic purposes. And I imagine it was a big group of people who were super against that in the beginning. And fast forward to today, raw jeans are not a thing. I've never heard of them. I've never seen anybody wear them. I've never seen them for sale before. The market has spoken, the culture has spoken, everyone's moved on and accepted that having jeans with varying levels of wear to them is normal. It's just an aesthetic preference. You might prefer just straight blue jeans, and you might prefer them to have a slight fade, or you might prefer, you know, them to have some rips or something in it. I mean, within reason, it's pretty standard, normal stuff. I think guitars are going to go down the same path. I think they already are. But going back to stolen valor a little bit, you know, the people with the jeans, I imagine, were like, well, your jeans, your raw jeans, they age and they get that cool look because you put the time in, right? Because you've done the hard labor. That's why your jeans look that way. And you're trying to skip the process and put on jeans that have the wear of somebody that spent hours and hours and toiled to get them to look like that. And so you've kind of skipped the process. So I think that's kind of, to steelman the argument a little bit, that's where those people are coming from, which when I take a step back, I can understand that thought process. But I just don't think in the real world, there are people out there that are claiming or trying to portray themselves as having earned, or rather contributed to, all of the wear on their Relic guitar, and say that they bought it brand new, glossy, beautiful, and then they turned it into this from playing it a ton. I've never heard anybody say that. I've never seen anybody try and claim that online in forums or Facebook groups. I'm sure somewhere, someone at some point in history has done that. I'm sure, right? Everything I'm saying to you guys in these videos, there's caveats to them. I'm speaking in generalities, right? Because you have to. There's always going to be exceptions to everything somebody says. Somebody will always find an exception. So with Relic guitars, maybe there's a person out there that's done that. But let's be honest, guys. Is that the majority? What percentage of people is that really happening? Let's be honest here. Nobody is holding up their Relic Fender and saying, this was all me. Or they're saying their reissue is an actual vintage guitar and trying to pawn it off to people as a vintage guitar. I see some people claim that as well. I've never seen that. I've never heard of that ever. I've never once heard even rumblings of that happening. Again, maybe somebody at some point has done that, but nobody's trying to say that their Fender Custom Shop Strat that's Relic'd is a vintage Strat and trying to convince people it is, unless it's a joke, right? That's not really happening. So again, I just don't really understand that argument. I don't think it's kind of a straw man. It's just not real. I just don't think it really happens. So, and maybe you disagree, put in the comments. That's totally fine. That's what it's there for. This is a conversation. It's a bit one way because you're not in front of me, but I guess I'm in front of you. So let me know in the comments. So that's kind of the number one thing I see in the deception we touched on a little bit. Trying to claim the guitar is something it's not. Going over a little bit more towards the pros side of Relic guitars. Let me grab a couple of my guitars real quick. So anybody that's followed me has seen this guitar. This is my 54 custom reissue. It's a made to measure, and I play this guitar a ton. You guys have seen it on the channel here in the garage, as well as my live clips. This is my main gigging guitar. This is a VOS guitar, although it might as well have been gloss because it had no aging to it whatsoever. The hardware was super shiny, and the finish, it's white, so it's hard to tell, I guess, that they did some VOS gunk on it, but didn't seem like it had anything on it. Might as well have been gloss. I played this thing a ton, and it is showing wear, for sure. In fact, I'll try and maybe get the camera to show something for you guys. So if you look at the hardware, for example, hopefully it'll pick up. You can see the gold is coming off in places, and you can see there's scratch marks and whatever else on there. Hopefully you guys can see some of this. So I played this guitar an absolute ton. Even still, if I played this guitar exclusively for a decade, it is not going to look anything like a vintage guitar. Why is that? It's because guitars are not made the same way as they used to be. The finish is different, right? The finish on this guitar is a lot stronger than the original 50s nitrocellulose lacquer that were put on the Gibsons. It's just a fact. Now, what am I to do about that? If I play this guitar a ton, it's never going to really look like the vintage ones. So that's why Relic guitars come about, because you cannot really, I mean, again, exceptions. There's going to be some exceptions somewhere. Somebody somewhere has played a modern Gibson for 25 years and it's aged, and looks somewhat vintage. Great. The vast majority of the cases, that's not what's going to happen. Now, I do think if I kept playing this for another 30, 40 years, it's going to start wearing the finish out right here where I pick and whatever else, and that's fine. But is this ever going to check naturally? No, it's never going to check naturally, especially here in Southern California. It's never going to happen. I like the look of checking. To be frank, my only vintage guitar, you guys saw, I showed it in the recent Do Not Buy Vintage video. It's a 63 Les Paul Jr. That guitar has almost no checking on it, and it's the original finish. That just kind of happens. I love checking. I wish this thing had checking. In fact, I have had planned for almost 2 years now a video idea of me checking this guitar. I have a giant freezer off camera, a stand-up freezer that I bought specifically for that video, and I've just been too scared to suck it up and try. I've been trying to find a beater Gibson SG or something that's got a headstock break or whatever. It's super cheap as my test dummy guitar. But I do want this thing to check. I want it to age. And that's not to try and go, oh man, make it look like it's something it's not. I play this guitar a ton. I have the proof of that. I want it to look older. And there's nothing I could really do from just raw playing it that's going to get it there just because of the way it's made today. Now let's go over to another Gibson guitar I have that is Relic'd. Now this is my 2018 made to measure Les Paul. It's a reissue, obviously. And this thing was Relic'd, and this was before the Murphy Lab came about. Now, one of the big reasons of why I bought this guitar was because it was aged. And the reason I love that so much is not because I even thought it looked like a vintage guitar, because frankly it doesn't. I loved it because it made it unique. It made it different than every other gold top reissue, that was VOS at the time. This was special to me because it had that little extra thing where it was Relic'd. I also really appreciated the way it was Relic'd back then. I did a whole video comparing this to the Murphy Lab reissues. It's one of my most popular videos on the channel. Check it out. I'll put it up in the corner if I remember. And I talk about how this was checked with a razor blade, which frankly does not look vintage correct at all. But I appreciate the skilled labor involved to do that. If you mess up, you're screwed, right? You have to refinish the entire guitar. It's incredible how skilled you have to be with a razor blade to get the curves and just all the perfect straight lines and all the kind of joined lines. It's really impressive to me, and I really appreciate that. And so that was one of the draws for this guitar to me. Now, I played this thing an absolute ton as well. I've gigged this a ton. And this actually has a ton of wear from me. Maybe it'll show up, maybe it won't. Again, you can see the tailpiece. Hopefully, maybe the light is too sharp. The finish is flaking off the tailpiece and the bridge. The plastics on the humbucker rings, they've got a ton of wear. I've kind of dug grooves into the plastic. I don't know if you'll be able to see it or not here as well, from the strings, from just playing it a ton. So this guitar is aging over time for me playing it a bunch, but will it ever look like a vintage guitar in the same way that the vintage guitars look today? I don't think so. The finish is different. It's not going to look like that. It is what it is, right? So if you want a guitar to look more like that, or you're somebody like me when I bought this, that you're just looking for something that makes the guitar more unique, it's an aesthetic thing. This to me was purely an aesthetic play. It was more attractive to me. It looked more unique. Therefore, I was interested in it. So that's kind of one primary thing with Relic guitars Let me grab some of the others and talk a bit more about those. So this guitar is a Fender Custom Shop. This is actually a NAMM limited edition Tele. I did a whole video review of this thing when I first got it, and it looked very little like it does today. Now this is mostly the same as Relic. There is a bit more wear kind of in the places where it has been Relic'd. But again, I was attracted to this because of just how unique it was. You can see the back as well, heavily Relic'd. Do I think this looks like a vintage guitar? No, absolutely not. But it's also not trying to be a vintage guitar. This is a fictional model that never existed. It's a 50s style Tele, but a thin line body. Double bound, white over sunburst. Come on, this never existed, but it's cool as hell. It's a great guitar. You know, some people think it's the most disgusting, ugly thing in the world because it's Relic. That's fine. It's an aesthetic thing. I get it. The other element to it is this guitar has, you know, over time aged actually quite a bit. Like I mentioned, some of the playwear, but also you can kind of see the finishes kind of turn this almost, it's a bit more yellow green than pure white like it was when I first got it. Just from UV exposure, it started to yellow a little bit. And then I'll flip it upside down. It'll be easier. And then there you go. All of the wear on the little marks on the fretboard, there was no black marks there at all when I got it. You can look at the original video to see all of that is from me. That's just over time that started to fill in, just like you see on a vintage guitar. So when I first got it, it looked a little goofy because it had all of these kind of wear marks in the fretboard, but it didn't look like super authentic. Now it's looking more authentic just from playing it. And so over time, these guitars, same thing with the back of the neck, it's got a lot more of this kind of black to it from just the natural oils in my hands. I just think it's cool. And I appreciate it's more akin to art to me, to be honest. This guitar it's a piece of art. It's unique. There's not a single one that looks like this. Fender made 14 of these total, and every single one is slightly different. They don't share the exact same wear patterns. I think it's cool. I like it for that fact. The other element of Relic guitars I think is a huge bonus is the fact that you don't have to worry about dinging them, damaging them in any way. And let's go over to my final guitar example, and I'll give a more specific example of that. So this is my Danocaster Offset. This is one of my favorite guitars of all time. I love this thing so much. And this is a Relic guitar as well. I've got some maybe controversial thoughts on this guitar, and I've been thinking about doing a dedicated review on it and really diving like an honest review. So I might do that. Let me know if you guys are interested in that sort of thing in the future. Those videos take a while, but if there's interest, I'll do it. So this guitar, I love this thing to death. And this is a pretty valuable instrument, especially today, now that with current prices of Danocasters. I love the fact that I don't have to worry about it getting damaged or dinged, and I could just use the guitar. So when you have a gloss guitar, an expensive gloss guitar, VOS guitar, whatever, man, you're just naturally, most people, myself included, you're just a little weary of damaging it. Even though maybe the end goal is you want it to look worn and it's still a part of you is like, oh, it hurts, right? When you ding the guitar for the first time, and then after that first one, it's like, okay, I feel okay, and you can kind of really start to enjoy the guitar. And that's one of the things I have problems with PRS is they're just so perfect aesthetically. That ding is just so painful with the PRS, and I don't think they look as good when they age as like a Fender or Gibson, but that's a whole other conversation maybe for a future video. But this guitar, funny story, I had it on a guitar rack in my office, and we had a Roomba at our old apartment, and you know, on a Roomba, you can or as an off-brand Roomba, but you can have a geo fence. You can have a fence where it can't go in the house, and it's like an invisible barrier. So I had that in my office so that the Roomba or whatever wouldn't go in there if I wasn't home. And for some reason, it decided to just disobey completely. Went into my office, and I had the guitar rack with multiple guitars on it, one of those Hercules, like 5 guitar racks or whatever. This was on there, and the Roomba went under, it got stuck, and just banged the crap out of this guitar. And I think, I'm not sure if you'll be able to see some of the wear. Sorry, I'm trying to look at my monitor up there, but I don't know if you can see, but it's got these like marks in it, and it's from a freaking Roomba. And this thing was gloss. I would be so devastated. I would be so sad. And because it's not, and this guitar already has those wear marks on it, I feel like I'm so much more free to enjoy the guitar. And that goes a long way for a lot of people, myself included. I'm able to enjoy guitars a lot more when I'm not so precious about them. And because somebody's already done the first painful thing in the guitar, it doesn't even phase me, which is fantastic. I've got the Telly just resting against a light stand right now. There's no guitar stands anywhere near me. I'm not worried about it one bit. If it gets a little scratch, I don't care. That's part of the guitar, right? So I think there's a lot of value to that, and you might not resonate with that. That's fine, but for a lot of people, they do. And that's a huge reason why people love vintage style Relic guitars. Now, the last kind of thing I'll say here probably is the, performance upgrade with Relic. Some people talk about, I don't know. I don't think it's really, some people say, oh, the age finish, breathes more naturally, or it's a bit thinner than the other finishes, so the guitars sound better. Maybe, probably not. I don't know. At best, inconclusive, I would say. Now, things like the neck being aged, I think is a big component, especially with Fender style guitars where they're more raw wood. They just tend to feel great. Although I'm not a huge fan of the raw wood custom shop stuff, but the Danocaster, for example, is the best neck I've ever felt, and is that raw wood kind of Relic feel. The Gibsons, I think, is the Murphy Labs. I actually think it can be a negative for the Relics. They can kind of feel a little bit weird. You can sometimes feel especially with the finishes starting to chip and lift on the Murphy Labs. I don't think that's necessarily a bonus in that regard. So I'm kind of saying in general, I don't really think that's a big component of an advantage for Relic guitars, in my opinion, or my experience. Let me put this guitar back and then I'll close this out. You guys will have to let me know what you think of these videos. I'm still trying to figure out exactly how I want to do them. I feel like the best way is just to turn the camera on and just talk stream of consciousness, just be authentic and not try and script anything out and have I'm looking at a teleprompter or whatever. That's obviously not the case. So let me know what you guys think. I could just keep talking about a lot of these things. Maybe you prefer the little 6-minute sound bites. Maybe you prefer these longer conversation ones. So let me know in the comments what you guys think. But as I was putting the guitar away, I had another thought that I haven't mentioned yet. And that was just the kind of Relic industry, so to speak. And I do think it rubs me a little bit the wrong way, specifically things like the Gibson Murphy Lab, where the labor involved in the Relic guitars they're doing now is so much less than the labor of the old Relic guitars they did with the just age stuff like my Gold Top, as well as the collector's choice kind of stuff where, again, hand checked. Think of the amount of time it takes to check a guitar, front, back, sides, every inch of it is checked by hand with a razor blade. Now compare that to what they're doing now. Currently, they're just throwing the guitar, not throwing, but placing the guitar in a freezer for, 5 minutes or whatever it is. And that does all the checking for them. And then they ding it up a little bit and they're good to go. Maybe that's, underplaying the amount of work for some of the steps there, but you get the gist of what I'm saying here. Huge price increase with Murphy Lab stuff. And the skilled labor involved is much less than it used to be for the older stuff. So that does rub me the wrong way. Same thing with Fender Custom Shop. They're all, freezer checked the same sort of way as far as I understand. So yeah, I don't love that. I think there's a lot of greed to it. Obviously the market is happy to fork over a ton of money for the Relic stuff. So, there's the incentives for the companies to do it, and people are willing to pay it, then they're going to charge it, is what it is. But I do want to just kind of put that out there that I don't like that. It doesn't sit well with me how much they charge for the Relicing. So anyways, from here, I think we just go ahead and close it out and just kind of say my final thoughts. I think it's really dumb. It's really dumb getting upset over somebody's aesthetic preferences. In Relic guitars, it all boils down to, in my opinion, it's an aesthetic preference. You like red, I like blue. I like Relic guitars, you might not. We don't harm each other in any way by having our preferences. And I don't think you should crap on people for liking something that you don't like. I just think that's dumb. I think it's really dumb, actually. And the other thing I'll say with Relic guitars is they are, in my mind, they're more tributes than anything else. They're not meant to fool you into thinking that they are something they are not. You look at modern custom shop, Fenders, Gibsons, they will have markings in the guitars to very clearly stop you from trying to forge them or position them as something they're not. So that kind of ends it right there. I also, like I argued earlier, don't think there's anybody really doing that where they're trying to sell or get bragging rights with people claiming it's a vintage guitar when it's a modern reissue Relic. So I don't think that's a thing. I think they're tributes. We all, people that are like-minded watching this video, we love or admire the 50s and 60s historic guitars in some fashion. They might not be the best playing guitars. They might not be the best sounding guitars. We talked about that in my vintage video. Regardless, there's an affinity towards them. And the Relic guitars are, in my mind, tributes to those things. They are ways for us to kind of have something similar, but it has other advantages, such as not costing, 5 to 6 figures, and more readily available, maybe not needing a refret job, and they play great right out of the box, et cetera, et cetera. There's some advantages to those Relic guitars as tributes to the thing, but not the thing itself. So I think in general, it's better if we just look at Relic guitars as tributes, not as complete replicas, because they're not. They've never been that, right? And just be nicer. I think that's a solid message for all of us on the internet. Let's just be nicer to each other. That being said, let me know what you think in the comments below. I know you will. If you liked the video, give it a thumbs up. And until next time, see ya.